Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by the FanDuel Sportsbook. We are here for your UFC betting preview on April 29th. Coming to you from Las Vegas, we have UFC Fight Night Song versus Simone. Brendan Glasheen joined by our UFC betting expert, Sean Zerillo, and Billy Ward. Most Fridays we're here. All goes down at the UFC Apex Center in Vegas on Saturday. We'll look ahead to the guys' favorite props, underdogs, and we'll also work in some best bets. As we normally do, we preview two fights extensively, including the main event, Ricky Simone, Song Yadong. Sean Zerillo, how do we want to bet this fight, and what jumps out to you just in terms of when you're picking it apart, trying to find the proper angles? What about the fight jumps out to you?
Yeah, so this was originally scheduled to be a 3-round fight. Moving back to 5 rounds probably helps Ricky Simone. He has the better cardio, more wrestling, all of the grappling upside, essentially. Song Yadong, the better striker, faster hands. And I think relative to Ricky's previous opponents, is much more physically strong. He's a really good athlete, much younger, or not much younger fighter, but the younger fighter, and still on his way up and improving. Working with Team Alpha Male, improving his takedown defense. We've seen him taken down in the past. Tends to happen later on in the fights, though. So the first 2-3 rounds, I do expect Song to have a 2-1 lead. After the 3 rounds, headed into the championship rounds, with the idea that maybe he can split one of the final 2 rounds and take a decision. But he does possess all of the finishing upside as well. And generally, when I'm weighing these fights, I want to favor the fighter who either has all of the finishing upside, all of the grappling upside, or all of the cardio upside. I would say Simone does have 2 of those 3. It does have the grappling upside, the wrestling upside, in addition to the cardio factor down the stretch. But I would say in Song's last fight against Corey Sandhagen, the way things were trending in the 4th round, I was actually very glad that fight got stopped due to cut stoppage, because I had bets on Sandhagen, and it seemed like Song was working his way back into the fight as the fight was going longer. So his cardio actually kind of impressed me in that fight. Was taken down a couple of times. I do expect the longer that this fight goes with Ricky Simone, Simone eventually takes him down in the later rounds, if not earlier, and maybe gets some top time. But in terms of the damage optics, who's going to be hitting harder? Who's going to be landing the more significant strikes? Not more significant strikes, but the more damaging strikes over the course of 15 minutes. I think all of that points to Song Yadong. So Song on the money line, plus 100, plus 105. I like it at any plus money number. He's my pick. I do expect a very competitive fight, though. And I think if you're looking for the best angle to bet Simone, I would probably target him live after round 2 or after round 3. Maybe he loses the first couple of rounds. He's down 2-1 heading into the 4th round, and you get a nice juicy plus money number on Ricky after round 2 or round 3. So that's how I'd look to bet the favorite. But pre-fight, I definitely think Song is the side.
Okay, excellent. And Billy, that you break this down in your luck ratings article available at Action Network. It's been up now for a couple days. The elevation of this event to the main event is key, as Zerillo mapped out with a couple of extra rounds here, and that's why you also like Song, but from a different perspective.
Yeah, I came to the same conclusion as Zerillo, but with slightly different process to get there. I actually think the 5 rounds help Song a little bit. Both guys have good cardio. We've seen it from both of them. Song went 4 rounds against Sandhagen. Simone has not had a 5-round fight in the UFC, but he won one, I think, to punch his ticket to the UFC. He won a 5-round championship fight. But wrestling, especially continuing to wrestle, is just a lot more taxing from a cardio standpoint than boxing. Olympic wrestling matches are 9 minutes and championship boxing matches are 36 minutes. So when we got one guy who's going to stand there and try to throw heavy punches, that just takes a lot less effort and energy than trying to wrestle the whole time. So if, Simone gets taken down early, but he's going to use a lot more of his gas tank than Song is. Plus, Simone needs to continue to win this fight in each and every round. He needs to control the fight. He needs to, get to the positions he needs to be. Song just needs to land one punch. So if it gets to the later rounds, both guys are kind of gassed. I'd rather be on the guy who just needs to land one shot rather than the guy who needs to control the round. That's where Sean and I see it kind of the same way, where he's going to land the more damaging shots. So I'm also playing the knockout odds at plus 210. I'm going to have both the money line and the knockout. I think it's probably the likelier way that Song wins this, even if it's a later one, just by, accumulating damage over the course of it rather than one big shot. And as Sean pointed out, he's just 25. Power is kind of one of the slower things to develop for fighters. We've seen him pick up knockouts in half of his UFC wins already. His knockdown rate is about twice the whole UFC average, even including heavier fighters. And to do all that at 25 when you're still getting a little bit stronger, still getting some of that man strength, I think, there's a lot more good things to come from him in terms of power.
Just before we jump off of the bantamweights here, I do want to comment because we saw Merab Dvalishvili just completely wipe out Petr Yan with a grappling heavy game plan over the course of 25 minutes relatively recently. That was an outlier performance. That is what Ricky Simón wants to do, is just sort of suffocate Song up against the cage or take him down over the course of 25 minutes and keep doing it and shoot 5 takedowns around. I don't think anybody on the planet can keep up with the pace that Merab Dvalishvili set in that fight. That was a unique performance. I don't think you're going to get that kind of sustained pace over 25 minutes by Ricky here. So maybe he does it in bursts, but to win 3 rounds, 4 rounds comfortably with that sort of game plan against a guy who hits much harder and is much more durable than you is tough.
Yeah, if you guys haven't grappled ever, taking someone down is like the most taxing thing you can do. Just once. Like, just try to go do it once against anyone who knows what they're doing, much less, 7-8 times over the course of 25 minutes. It's awful. So maybe he's the guy who can do it, but when we're getting plus money on the other side, I'm going to bet that he can't.
Okay, there you go. So there's your breakdown of Song and Simón coming up on Saturday night. There's your main event. We'll get to the fight of the night in moments. Zerillo, I've got FanDuel pulled up here. Favorite underdog that you're looking towards this weekend?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Fernando Padilla at plus 130. I also like him by knockout or TKO at plus 360. This should be a firefight where Padilla is younger, 7 years younger, 2-inch reach advantage, and he has half the fight history and damage on his chin as Julian Erosa. I think Julian Erosa, skill for skill, is a top 15 ranked fighter in his division, but he has a bit of a wonky chin, and he doesn't necessarily pursue the grappling upside that he has until he gets hurt. He doesn't go out there like Ricky Simón and proactively pursue multiple takedowns per round. He tends to reactively shoot a takedown once you hurt him. So he may possess the grappling upside in this fight, the grappling advantage. Padilla is 2 years younger, though. He's faced a high level of competition. Fought in LFA, CFFC, fought Dan Ige regionally. He's faced some really high-level guys throughout his regional career, even though he's just now making it to the UFC. So I think we're going to get a very high-variance fight where these two exchange in the middle, and Padilla is the younger guy with the reach advantage and hits just as hard. So giving him the durability advantage in what could be a slugfest, I like him at plus money, like him by knockout at plus 360. And I do think Julian Erosa, if he grapples proactively, can win the fight probably comfortably, but it's not something he typically does.
Okay, Padilla down to plus 116 as we speak to you on this Friday morning over at FanDuel. Billy, underdog that jumps out to you.
Yeah, not a great card for underdogs, in my opinion, especially at this point where some of the value, as you just pointed out, has been lost. I kind of like Waldo Cortez Acosta. Honestly, a lot of what Zerillo said about Padilla applies here too. He's younger, reach advantage, fighting a guy who's been through some wars and been around forever. He's fighting Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who is skill for skill like considerably better than he is, right? Like Rogerio de Lima is much more experienced, all that. But Rogerio de Lima is almost 38. Rogerio de Lima was on The Ultimate Fighter when Waldo Cortez Acosta was a minor league pitcher in the Reds organization and had never even had an amateur fight. So at plus 160, I'm kind of banking in that Waldo Cortez Acosta has developed a little bit more here than we've seen in his last couple fights. I was a little bit disappointed with both of his first 2 UFC fights, but this is a guy who's only been a professional for 5-ish years, only been an amateur MMA fighter for I think 6 or 7. It was the first time he ever stepped into a cage. He has a huge athleticism advantage. He's bigger, stronger, younger, and it's just a lot easier to think of a 31-year-old who's only been training a handful of years as getting much better versus a 37-year-old where we've probably already seen his best fights.
Zerillo, you find a first 5 money line play on this former minor leaguer or what? Is that what you're looking for right now?
Yeah, so Cortez Acosta, an interesting fighter, right? Because, he does have that pitching background. So you would expect him to really have this powerful lower half and to really chuck bombs, but he just kind of touches people. It's a lot of light volume, peppering you from the outside. Billy said he does have the reach advantage. I think his grappling deficiency, though, could be what costs him here. De Lima sometimes does pursue the takedown, sometimes he doesn't and just tries to chuck bombs, but I think he's a BJJ black belt. I think he can probably top time Acosta here. if not knock him out. But the longer this fight goes, as Billy mentioned, Acosta, the younger guy, maybe over the course of 15 minutes, he outvolumes him. I mean, he should outvolume him over 15 minutes, but maybe he has better cardio to do it over 15. So I get the angle. I'm on DeLima personally. I think he finishes him with grappling in round one, but I certainly get the argument for, a heavyweight fight where most things are closer to even money, taking a shot on a dog. But yeah, I mean, Acosta, an interesting prospect. You don't see too many baseball players, ex-baseball players coming over to MMA. It's a lot of hockey players, football players. So I feel bad betting against a guy who should be my guy.
Yeah, I think he's the only one. It's rugby, we found out, is the best other sport for MMA. But yeah, not a lot of baseball. I will say to the grappling, pretty much all of Rogerio de Lima's losses in the UFC, including all fighter submissions. Not that I think he's going to be scared to take down a guy who was, a pitcher 10 years ago and worried about getting submitted. But if I'm a guy who's lost all my fights by submission, maybe I don't force a takedown. I don't know. Kind of sloppy heavyweight fight. I'm also on this one to go to a decision at pretty significant plus money for some of the reasons Sean pointed out. But plus 160 is pretty good for a sprinkle on a guy who has all the athletic tools.
All right, the fight of the night we want to touch on at UFC Fight Night Song Simone is we've got Caio Borralho and Michael Oleksiejczuk. Oleksiejczuk is at plus 290 on the money line, and Caio's at minus 385. We don't normally like to lay big juice on the show, just based on what you guys have given out in previous episodes. So we try to find creative ways to bet the fight of the night. Zerillo, why is this fight notable to you, and what kind of edges have you found?
I think the winner of this fight will probably get a big matchup next, probably a ranked opponent. Two very exciting middleweights. McCall has moved down from light heavyweight. He used to knock light heavyweights out cold, and I think his power and his strength at middleweight is pretty substantial. He was always undersized for 205. Moving down to 185 is his proper weight class, and I think he hits extremely hard for the division. 10 of his 18 wins are in round one. 14 of his 18 wins inside the distance. And in this particular matchup, I have a difficult time seeing him winning a decision. If he's landing the things that he needs to land on Borralho in order to win a decision, he probably knocks him out. It's just difficult to envision him winning clean minutes and the fight going 15 minutes. It doesn't really align. Caio should be the better minute winner. All of the grappling upside. It's very likely he finds a submission in round 2 or round 3. But he's also spent a ton of time in the UFC with back control and never submitted his opponents. It's a very frustrating guy to watch because he gets to these dominant positions. He's completely out of danger, but then he doesn't seem to be able to want to lock up the submission. It's not that he can't. He almost seems to not want to. It's like he's trying to get cage time. But in terms of this particular opponent, I think he's going to be in trouble in the first round. McCall pressures everybody. I cashed a 7-1, 9-1 ticket on McCall round 1 against Gamzatov a couple fights back. I think you could just bet McCall like this in every one of his fights and come out ahead. And these are the best round 1 prices I've seen on him. So McCall round 1 straight up is, I believe, 10-1, but his round 1 knockout is 13-1. His round 2 knockout is 24-1. And just his straight up knockout odds are plus 650. I like all of those. I would not play any of them big. I think somebody wins this fight inside the distance. It is minus 200 to end inside the distance. And it's going to be very binary. But you're telling me that Michail Oleksiejczuk is plus 300 on the money line, but I generally think most of his win condition is tied to that plus 1,300 knockout round 1 or plus 2,400 knockout round 2. So yeah, I given the price discrepancy where those props are, I thought his round 1 prop was going to be like 5-1, not 10-1. So the odds on his finish props just are substantially higher than I was expecting relative to his money line and also relative to where I think his chances of winning minutes in this fight are, which is pretty low.
It's interesting. Sometimes we do these betting previews and sometimes we bring up the possibility of live betting and if cards are good for live betting opportunities. And Billy, you think there's actually a chance here on the Caio side that's a possibility. I
do. And, for literally every reason that Zerillo laid out, I was originally on Borralho, like as of last night on Borralho by submission, considerably better grappler. As Sean pointed out, I've been kind of disappointed with his performances in the UFC in that he's not hunting submissions when he looked really good on the Contender Series. But something happened overnight and his sublines went from close to plus 200 all the way less than plus 150. And I don't like that price just because, again, as Zerillo pointed out, we don't know that he's actually going to look for the sub. He's going to look to get close to one, but then is he going to take it? But, if he gets beat up in round 1 and then decides he's just going to grapple his way to victory in rounds 2 and 3, we could get a really good price on him. Still, have the hedge of those first round Mikhail props that Sean pointed out. But Mikhail is 1-2 in the UFC in fights that make it past the first round. And that one win was a split decision that was pretty questionable.
Yeah, he didn't deserve that. Yeah.
Right. So if it goes out of the first round, he more or less loses. We can feel pretty comfortable out of that. So dream scenario here, we take the round 1 knockout at plus 1,300. If it doesn't happen, but he hurts Bahayo, hopefully we get Bahayo close to even money at the end of round 1. Either way, we come out ahead. That's the way I'm seeing it.
Yeah, I agree with the live angle. I think you can also do same game parlay with Kaio in the over 1.5. And then Kaio's round 2, round 3 props. You could just play McCall round 1, Kaio round 2, round 3. Maybe McCall gets the early round 2 knockout, but I think after the first round, there should be Kaio's fight. So I agree with the live angle. And I think, like I said, McCall early, Kaio late props. I think those are fine angles too.
All right. So keep an eye on Ola Shaychuk early and his possibility of frustration early on based on what the guys just gave us there. So, and that catches my attention because as Zerillo laid out, the plus money that's available over at FanDuel. Money line or potentially KO round 1, round 2. Okay, let's go to the prop market. Zerillo, what do you have for us?
Josh Quinlan by submission at plus 750. He is minus 110 to minus 140 to win this fight inside the distance. This fight is minus 400 to end inside the distance. He is 5 inches shorter with a 5-inch reach discrepancy. Do you think he wants to stand and strike with this guy? He has the grappling advantage. He has a couple of rear naked chokes on his record. He has all of the grappling upside. The problem is Josh Quinlan likes to stand and bang, but I do think in this matchup with the size discrepancy, he will recognize where he has the advantage. So as I said, minus 400 to end inside the distance. He's minus 110 to win inside the distance, and his sub line is plus 750 against the guy who has significant height and reach advantages against him. You don't need to think too much about this one. Josh Quinlan by submission, plus 750, like down to about plus 700.
Billy, prop play?
Yeah, another middleweight fight, Rodolfo Vieira versus Cody Brundage. This is an interesting fight. It's two of the better grapplers in the middleweight division with some significant questions if it's striking. I'm looking at Rodolfo to finish this one by submission. They're both grapplers, but Brundage is a D2 former college wrestler who either has a blue or a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. Rodolfo Vieira is like a 4-time world champion in jiu-jitsu, ADCC world champion. This is a huge different level between their grappling acumen here. And, it's tough betting on Rodolfo against guys who might not want it to be a grappling match. He just lost to Chris Curtis in a fight that didn't hit the ground very much. I just think Brundage is too much of a one-trick pony himself that he's going to force this one to be a grappling match, which is a horrible place for him to be. Also have a lot of questions about Rodolfo's cardio, though. He's tired out, got submitted by guys he shouldn't have if it goes past that. So you can juice this up a little bit by taking his sub early, sub round 1. If you got a same game parlay sub and under 1.5, props like that too. And then inside the distance is minus 152 in case he decides to beat him up on the ground instead of tapping him out.
I think Vieira has better cardio than Cody Brundage. This is something I was thinking about a lot this week. Vieira, a guy on this podcast I've continually bet against because of poor cardio. I think he has the better cardio in this fight. So I don't really know how Brundage wins aside from knocking him out cold. I don't think he's going to outlast him. I don't think he's going to pace him on the feet. I think Vieira might even be the better striker. So yeah, I agree. Vieira, same game parlay under 2.5, minus 135. That seems pretty solid. He probably does this in round 1. You could take a look at his round 1 props too. I think he does it quick. But yeah, there's like a huge gap here in terms of decorated grappling acumen. So yeah, I agree with Billy, but I think the cardio shouldn't even be a concern really.
Yeah, I'm not super. That's why I have the inside the distance or the sub rather than the early stuff. I also wrote this one up for the DFS article that's going to come out shortly, and I said one guy is tremendously better on the ground. Neither of them are great strikers. Rodolfo might be the better one there. I don't. It's definitely not the A skill for either of these guys, but it's 51-49 at worst for Rodolfo.
Yeah, he is jabs better. I think extended striking, I trust Rodolfo more. But one punch knockout, I'd probably take Cody. But that's probably his only win condition is just clipping him and hurting him.
For a card that neither of you seem to be all that in love with before we started recording, it sounds that I like the energy and the enthusiasm here that you've delivered so far on the podcast.
A lot of the fights last week, we didn't even really get definitive outcomes. A lot of them ended weird questionable judges decisions, a headbutt that ended up in a no contest. There weren't many fights where it was like after the fact I was like definitively that guy was a good bet or that guy was a bad bet.
Mhm.
I do feel like I'm able to break down a lot of these fights well this week and feel like I have pretty solid takes, but at the same time, they're mostly bad fights. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes the most interesting cards are more difficult to bet. Sometimes the less interesting cards are maybe easier to bet. I found like I didn't have a tough time pulling the trigger on a lot of the things I wanted to bet on. There wasn't a lot of like the Blades Pavlovich fight last week. I gave out reasons why you should bet Pavlovich round 1 or bet Blades to win a longer fight. And we saw that play out exactly like that. I just picked the wrong side. So I didn't have as many cases this week where I was like kind of flipping the coin for who do I pick. I feel like I have both sides of it. I feel like there's a clear side in a lot of these.
Okay, as we normally do before we go, we'll call it our final bet. Best bet. We're gonna adhere to it as final bet. So Zarilla, one more for us for UFC Fight Night in Vegas this weekend.
I like final bet. The buddy system, Martin Budaj, -110. He has the grappling and the finishing upside here. He is the naturally much bigger heavyweight than Jake Collier. Collier, former middleweight. They matched him up with a lot of guys who are not true heavyweights. He got knocked out by Tom Aspinall in his heavyweight debut. That's a true heavyweight. But after that, they've given him John Vellante, Carlos Felipe, Chase Sherman, Andrei Arlovski, Chris Barnett, a lot of guys who have the frames of 205 or 185 pounders who have inflamed and are fighting at heavyweight, like Jake Collier is. Martin Budaj is a true heavyweight. This guy's 265 pounds. He will probably be able to take Collier and just push him up against the cage and hold him there for as long as he wants to, in addition to taking him down if he wants to. I think the reason people are betting Collier and view him as a pick'em in this heavyweight fight, where a lot of fights should be a pick'em, is the volume. They expect over the course of 15 minutes that Collier is going to land more volume. The thing with Budaj, though, is he was doubled up on strikes in his last fight, probably deserved to lose it against Lucas Bresky. But the way he absorbs damage is perfect in terms of the fighter you want to bet on. Never shows that he was impacted by anything, never wears anything on his face. He looks clean at the end of fights. So even though he was doubled up on strikes in his last fight, he was the guy moving forward the whole time. And he was the guy who didn't look like physically like he got hit. So just the optics that Budaj has, in addition to the fact that he's going to be 30 to 40 pounds naturally heavier than Collier and have more of the finishing upside, he's extremely durable. And I think if he hits Collier clean hard a couple times, I think he can fold him, because like I said, this is one of the first true heavyweights that Collier has actually faced, the guy who has not substantial power, but actual heavyweight power. So Martin Budaj, pick him price -110, like him up to about -120, grappling upside, durability upside, and the cage push upside too.
Bill, you've got a prelim fight angle as well. You want to weigh in on this one though, because you did write up about this fight in the Luck Ratings article.
Yeah, so I wrote for this one Luck Rating article, put a little note here in our show sheet. I hate giving out so many live angles for this card because you got to be pretty sick to dedicate 6 hours of your Saturday night to this one. But if you are,
come on, man, that's perfect.
I will be. Yeah, I'm not judging anyone. That's what I'm going to be doing. But I'm just saying maybe do something else with your time. But if you're doing that, I really like Budaj live. You know, for the Luck Ratings article, I looked through the scorecards of every fight that these guys have had went to a decision. Collier has a lot of decisions where he won round 1, maybe round 2, lost it late. I think, you know, Sean pointed out he's not really naturally a guy who should be fighting heavyweight. Carrying all that extra weight probably isn't great for the cardio. And his whole game is just a ridiculous amount of volume, which is really hard to sustain for 3 rounds when you're, you know, 50 pounds overweight or whatever. So if you're watching this one, Collier is a good round 1. Love that spot. But I also do like Budaj at a roughly pick 'em price.
All right. And you've got, as you said, you've got a prelim card play as well, money line play.
Yeah, this is tough. If this were earlier in the week at the price we could get her at, this would be my best bet. At the price it's at now, it's more of a final bet. But that's Jamie Lynn Horth. Money is poured in on her against Haley Cohen. This was roughly a pick 'em, and I think Horth was even plus money when it was first announced. Now she's in the -150 range. I just think Haley Cohen is not good. She won a split decision in her Contender Series fight to get to the UFC that I would have gone the other way. The fight ended with her opponent like seconds away from choking her unconscious. And there's, a certain type of female fighter that looks a certain way that sometimes gets them into the UFC more so than their fighting ability necessarily does. And Cohen fits that description. All of her pre-UFC fights were against people with records like 1-1, 2-0, split decision wins against a 5-5 fighter. Just not an impressive resume before the Contender Series fight where she didn't look that great. Whereas Horth is 5-0, all stoppages, reasonably high level of competition. Like I said, don't love it at -150 if you're taking it now. But, the fact that we've seen that much money line movement is probably a good sign where the sharp bettors are on as well. So, again, love that bet at -110, -120. Still like it at -150.
Cohen open plus or -120. It's all the way out to +126 now. So the line is completely flipped. It was basically a pick 'em across the market, if not a lean towards Cohen as the favorite. And now she's a substantial underdog. I'm also with Horth or on Horth with you at -150, but not a big bet. And really, it wouldn't really bet it past that price. But we've tried to fade Cohen a couple times. She just hasn't been able to get her first UFC fight yet.
This is the third time I've bet against her. At this point, I'm just loaning money to the sports books, but maybe this one will actually go through.
And as you said, if people want to dedicate that time, they can feel that pain. Yeah. Okay. So if you want to get in on Jamie Lynn Horth, probably do so now when you tune in before that number continues to rise. All right, gents, that'll do it for this week's UFC betting preview. Normally, we join you on Fridays to get you set for Saturday's card. For Sean Zerillo, Billy Ward, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for tuning into the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.